Okay, so my boy Richard at Blue Fox Entertainment sent me across this new one. It is Wake Up from directors Anouk Whissell and her brother Yoann-Karl Whissell. The film is produced by Gould and Laurent Boudins. It is executive produced by Adria Monez and Maud Petit. Co-produced by Barnaby Waz and Yann Deguy. With line production from Albert Morea and some production coordination from Julia Caldaz. Anu Batala took care of the music. Leo Hinston is on cinematography. Editing all of this, we have Francisco Simard and Joris Laquatant. Lucy Lennox was down with the casting. Pep Oliver is art direction, costume design. We have a Vignette Escobar. Hair and makeup, we've got Emi V, Mariana Triaz, Juan Olmo, and Marina E. Gomez. So, cast. Who's in the film? Well, we've got Ethan, played by Benny O'Arthur. Yasmin, played by Jacqueline Moré. Grace, played by Alessia Yoko Fontana. Tyler, played by Kyle Scudder. Emily, played by Charlotte Stoiber. There's Kareem, played by Tom Gould. We've also got Kevin, played by Turlough Convery. Then his buddy Jack, played by Aidan O'Hare. There's their boss, right, played by Gary Anthony Stennett. And the chief of police, played by Daniel Lund. Right, so what is all of this about, you may ask? Well, a group of young activists set out to make an environmental statement by vandalizing a home superstore as it closes. But their plan goes terribly wrong when they become trapped inside and must face a deranged security guard with a gruesome passion for primitive hunting. As the night fills with violence and terror, the teenagers find themselves in a desperate fight for their lives. So, that is the film, people. That is the film. There's a little bit on the making. Okay, where did I just lost my pace? All right, so at the heart of Wake Up is a group of young activists who have had enough of big corporations wanting the planet's resources, of nobody paying attention, of being quiet about the state of the world that's being left to them. When they arrive at idea, they feel ready to take on anything, but they face a blood-chilling challenge when they come up against security guards, Jack and Kevin. And the night takes a terrible turn. If they've any hope of making it out alive, they'll have to put aside all their differences and trust each other with their lives. The group is led by Ethan, A young man who takes his position very seriously to the point that he's sometimes reluctant to let others step up. Grace is easygoing, cheerfully rolling around the store on her roller skates and will do anything for her friends. Tyler is probably more here for the fun than the cause and hopes this might be a chance to get closer to Grace. Yasmin is passionate about their environmental cause and worries the others don't share her commitment. Kareem, the youngest member, is new to the group, still finding his way and trying unsuccessfully to impress Ethan. Thankfully, he's helped by the kind Emily, who does her own thing and tries to stay out of internal group politics. So that's a little bit, about the group and everything like that. So it also says, when RKSS received Alberto Martin's script for Wake Up, they knew it was unlike anything else they'd ever seen. A horror movie. There's simultaneously an urgent message about one of the most important issues affecting the world and a supremely entertaining cat and mouse horror. First of all, the idea of a slasher in a furniture store is just so much fun. Then under that, you have this really powerful message about the environment and the world we're leaving for the next generation. It was such a strong combination, and usually in a slasher movie you have a group of kids that just want to party. These kids are on a mission, so that's immediately new. We loved it. There's a lot more, but I think I think you get the gist of things. I mean, we did have Slacks from a few years ago, right? That was set in a retail store, right? Selling jeans and the like. It was a killer pair of jeans, which was a great film. I forget what episode we covered that on. It was some of the early days of the pod. But that was definitely a fun one, and we spoke with one of the stars and the writer, I believe, to go check that one out. But yeah, I think it's definitely challenging things that we've seen happening right in the last few years. I remember, I think it was at the start of lockdown, right? There was all these reports of kids staying around in IKEAs, right? And then recording TikToks and all of this. It was some weird trend going around, and they had to get extra security to ensure that there was no one left in the building, right? So, it's piggybacking off of that. And then, we've got all of these Stop Oil and other groups protesting. So it's kind of combining those two things, which, it works. It works. I do think, right, that, setting it in the store brings a load of different, opportunities. And, we have this guy who's into primitive hunting, so you can have all of these traps and different things, right? So all of that, opens the door to, I think some interesting stuff, right? If you like Saw, Final Destination, Escape Room, those kind of films, then Wake Up kind of taps into your your vibe, right? I I think in the press notes they talk about creating this environment, right, for the cast to build that friendship, which you'd be like, yeah, it makes sense because they are meant to be this tight knit group of friends, right? And so you're like, okay. And to some degree, right? To some degree, you do look at it and you go, yes, we do see this group of friends. But in another degree, there are things in the film that kind of don't fully come across or get lost, right? Like, there's this bit of this romance that gets like slightly touched on, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So it kind of feels a bit pointless, you know? And then the talk about Hakeem being the newest member of the group, right? So there's a little bit of tension there, but we don't really know why, right? They don't really go into why and how he is in the group then, right? Like, well, why are we bringing a new person into the group? Why is there a little distrust? You know what I mean? What has he shown to prove distrust? And like, because if there is some kind of ifs about him, why would you bring him along to this? You know what I mean? So we have all of these things which I think could have been clearer, right? Then we've got Kevin, this security guard who's into his primitive hunting. Now, being into primitive hunting doesn't make you a mass murderer, right? So what else is going on with him? Because obviously we hear about an incident at the start of the film, right? So we know, okay, there must be other stuff happening, but what is that? You know what I mean? Like just a little bit into his backstory, right? Maybe you were saying, he's returned from the war, right? He's got PTSD. It could have been something like that, maybe. Nothing. It's not exactly original, but it would explain some things, or just anything like that, right? Just to be like, okay, that would explain how this person snaps. Maybe, his relationships crumble. He's lost someone close to him. He's been, diagnosed with a terminal illness. Like, just something to explain how someone can go off the deep end. Right? I think it's those things that this film is just missing. I think if it could have just answered those things, those two simple kind of things, right? Boom. Everything is now covered, right? And you can really buy into what is here. Now, if you don't, right? If this is the thing, right? When you're breaking down films, you are looking at every aspect of them. Now, there's people that can go to the cinema and, just enjoy it for what it is. So if you're not thinking too hard, then this is probably going to work for you for sure. You know what I mean? There are some instances of injury, right? People getting certain injuries, but then walking around and not, and there's walking around, right? It's slight limp, and then there's just like, okay, if you have this thing, you ain't walking around. Or like there's a bit with someone at the start they're limping and then they're not, right? So it's a little inconsistency on that side of things, you know. And the end does catch you. The end definitely catches you off. Well, I say not the end, right? In the build up to the end. I mean, the last image we're kind of left with doesn't necessarily make any sense. You know what I mean? Doesn't necessarily make any sense, right? Because you just think, how would that, when you factor in the other thing, you know, but right, it's presenting a tableau, right? So imagery wise, you get it, but execution, how, right? How? I don't know. But as I said, if you just go in and you just want, you know, deaths, blood, gore, all of that jazz, then Wake Up, you know, I feel that's probably going to work, right? The environmental message, it is what it is with these young people, because you understand, right? Corporations doing things not great, but do their actions actually move the needle? No, not really, right? So you do get that. None of these activists are really likable. You know what I mean? Actually, no one in the film is actually likable. But that's not a bad thing, because you are just looking at it from multiple points of view, you know? And I think you can do that, right? You can do that. Now, it does get a little squirrely when it comes to Kevin, as I said, because we don't know what the actual catalyst is, right? Why is he this person? That's the thing. We don't know that. But otherwise, you know, as I said, if you like Escape Room, Saw, Hostel, all of those kind of things, then Wake Up could definitely work for you. Some inventive deaths, right? Good, you know, production and all of that. It works on those fronts, right? So yeah, Wake Up, it's hitting, I think it's hitting cinemas. Yeah, it's not, I just know it's out, right? It's not clear if it's cinema or if it's just straight VOD. But it's dropping stateside and in Canada on the 4th of April. So if it sounds like it's your cup of tea, then people, you will be able to engage with the film from the 4th. So enjoy Wake Up.